Thanks for listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember you can subscribe to Farmers Weekly magazine and get all the latest news, views and market prices by visiting fwi.co.uk.
It was a fundamental mistake. It was pointed out lots of times, including by some of the external programme reviews. There was a lot of political pressure to get the scheme up and running quickly. Clearly, there was a lot of industry kickback to the withdrawal of basic payment scheme. And I think that political pressure resulted in some possibly unwise decisions, some of the payment rates, indeed some of the options, in a at times desperate need to show that there was progress and there would be farmer uptake.
Just what went wrong with the sustainable farming incentive, and where do we go from here? As farmers start banging in spring crops at the expense of environmental options, we speak to Natural England's former head of agriculture, Geoff Sansome.
The Farmers Weekly podcast.
Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
How can farmers make up lost revenue now the sustainable farming incentive is closed to applications? With more on that later. But first, we speak to two farmers who are changing the way that they farm. Now, there's no option to join the flagship government scheme that paid farmers to undertake environmental measures. First up, Mike Purnell from Bedfordshire, who's been drilling spring barley.
We've got two different businesses that are just undergoing a SFI 24 application at the moment. On our home estate, there is a scheme that is literally ready to press the button. I actually had filled it all in, and I was just getting an outside person to check that there was no clashes with our other scheme, because we've got a higher tier and an SFI 23, and I just wanted an outside person to check that they were all compatible, there was no clashes and there was going to be no issues. Ready to go. And with half an hour's notice, I wasn't there to press the button, and that's not been submitted. On the other farm that we've got, a new CFA, 1,000-acre CFA, and the money from the SFI was all part of the farm income to become part of the divisible surplus. I have again started to fill in the application for that. But there was for some reason I couldn't enter a lot of the details. It was blocking me from putting options on fields. So fortunately, I had already written the RPA an inquiry through the portal, to which they still haven't replied 2 weeks later. And that also then missed the date. So yeah, two big implications on two different enterprises.
I understand, Mike, that some of that land was going to go under the NUM3 option, the legume fallow. What are you going to do instead?
We're certainly doing. We had planned on the CFA. We'd planned an NUM3. We had done some summer cover crops and all the rest of it. You know, from an agronomic point of view, but also an environmental point of view. Well, they've become spring barley today, so already the impact on the environment will be felt, because we're not doing things, and we're putting spring barley in its place.
So, Michael, what's the impact across the business overall then for not having these two schemes? What will be the short-term 5-year impact now that you're not going to have 3 years of SFI coming in on these two schemes?
Well, we all know that farming is a difficult game to make a margin in anyway. And I do get a bit fed up when I hear people talking about subsidy, because maybe BPS was subsidy. This is not subsidy. SFI, mid-tier, higher tier, they are compensation. They are compensation for us taking land out of production and putting it into land use with a better environmental outcome, hopefully. So this is not a subsidy. This is us doing something. But the long term is it's going to be very, very much more difficult to turn a decent return. Now, I know that the government will tell us that we should all diversify and all the rest of it. Well, it's all very well diversifying and putting wind turbines up and solar panels and renting out our grain stores. But we should still be able, in my opinion, we should be able to farm, to produce food for the country, to look after the countryside, the environment for everybody, and actually be able to make a profit at it. Not just rely on the fact that we're bankrolling our farming operations, are feeding the nation with sublets of industrial units in our farmyard. So the long and the short of it is, it's going to make a very challenging situation financially even more challenging.
And presumably you're going to farm the farm to the absolute max to guarantee the max output you can.
Like I say, we've already cut down some NUM3 areas, some summer cover crop areas. But yes, we need to get a bigger pile of wheat in the shed, and you do that by potentially increase, as long as the return on the investment, by going against kind of the principles of what we want to do, and by increasing inputs to try and produce more food so that you've got more grain to sell, and that will also come at an environmental expense.
Mike, on your farm, you're absolutely no stranger at all to environmental schemes, and you haven't really changed direction, even with the advent of the SFI. I mean, you are absolutely committed and down this route. So does this really make a big difference to you?
Look, it does make a difference, because the owner's principles are that we should farm in an environmentally friendly way. So for years now, yes, we have been doing a lot of these actions, but to be fair, that was alongside BPS. So we could afford maybe to although I don't agree we'd ever take a hit on it financially, but to have taken land out of production, because BPS was the compensation for doing that. We've now had the double whammy. We've lost BPS and we've lost the SFI. So now there is no compensation. We are doing it, we are having to do it for free or not do it.
Bedfordshire Farm Manager Mike Pennell, thank you for talking to us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. One of many farmers who are going to be looking at what they do and changing what they do. Mike, obviously not doing legume fallow anymore, putting in spring barley, Louise.
Yeah, so it seems. So two agreements that Mike was about to push the button on are now looking like they've gone in the bin, which is a real shame, because this is a farm that has been following regenerative practices for a long time now, and they've made real headway. Mike is absolutely committed to this way of farming. He doesn't accept that yields have to be lower. He says all the effort that he's putting into improving soil health and doing the right thing, he thinks that he can get the yields right up there, and he can still have a high performing farm when it's being farmed with the environment in mind. So he is having to change direction, which is a real shame, because he hasn't, of course, now got the protection that some of that SFI income would have given him.
And Mike, also, Hugh, very clear that this is not a subsidy. This is a payment for providing an environmental benefit or compensation, as he put it.
Yeah, and that's how he sees it. And you can understand the decisions he's taken based on the fact that that's now not available to him. He will farm more of the farm. There won't be the chunk left out in legume fallow. And he will be effectively, well, like most people in his position, he's trying to get as much out as he can to sort of cover costs and effectively generate as much cash as he can. Interestingly, on one of the many WhatsApp groups that obviously I'm tuned into, today, people talking about fertiliser availability becoming a bit of an issue, because obviously lots of people would have bought fertiliser months ago anyway, but there seems to be a sudden interest in fertiliser, which are effectively filling lumps of ground like this, which were not going to be cropped and treated with fertiliser, have fertiliser spread on it, and suddenly all this extra spring barley is going in the ground, and it's going to need some fert. So that's having an impact there as well. So it's going to be quite interesting. I suppose on the upside, as a beef farm that buys in straw, there'll be plenty of barley straw around by the end of the year.
Yeah, that's if I guess they can get the spring seed as well as the fertiliser, Louise.
Yes, I mean that the seed's got to be in the system for them to be able to put it in the ground, hasn't it? I think coming back briefly to Mike for a moment. I went out to visit that farm just as the SFI was launched, and I remember him pointing out to me at the time that he hadn't used an insecticide on the farm for many years, and he'd always been growing a companion crop with his oilseed rape. So some of these actions that were just coming in when we had our last meeting, as he said, we've been doing all those things here for a while. So it was, if you like, it was validation that he was going in the right direction and that everything was happening as the wider society wanted it to. So it's a real shame that a farm like that is going to be disadvantaged, just as it's a real shame that other farms are going to be disadvantaged too.
Well, that's the situation in Bedfordshire for lowland arable growers locked out of the sustainable farming incentive, which has closed 2 applications. As Louise says, lots of other farmers disadvantaged too, including upland livestock producers. Here's Claire Wise from County Durham.
It's just absolute panic as to where the cash flow is going to come from. And it's the fear of the unknown, because they've closed SFI, but without telling us when it is going to reopen or when anything else is going to come our way. So, we're a big livestock area. Mainly up here, bread and butter is mixed farming, upland farming, grazing livestock. They're all the sectors that have taken a massive hit on income in the last few years. And as a result, people are absolutely banking on SFI and coming out of old schemes and going into SFI to bridge that gap.
Claire, had you picked up any signs at all, any early warning that the situation might be about to change?
No, absolutely nothing. I think we'd all seen a little bit on social media, maybe a couple of days before, which you tend to dismiss as conspiracy theories. But no, absolutely no indication. And I think that's what makes it so hard, because I think if we'd all known or suspected, we would have planned accordingly. I mean, for one, I had an agreement that I was about to press send on and had absolutely no idea, and the rug was just pulled from under us.
And Claire, why were so many people that you've spoken to in your area, why were they not in SFI last year? What was different about the offering last year compared to the offering now?
I mean, for those of us that are on the uplands, lots of people were just ineligible to get in. They were in existing schemes. People were desperate to transfer over to SFI, and DEFRA just kept saying it wasn't possible because the systems didn't align. So there's a big raft of people who couldn't, even though they wanted to. And for other people, the grassland offer just wasn't good enough. It was a very narrow offer. It really didn't offer anything for those on marginal land in the uplands. And there's been a huge amount of work being put in with DEFRA over the last few months to try to improve that offer. And we were all assured that was coming imminently. So there were people hanging on until the scheme was more suitable for their business, never thinking in a million years that the doors would be shut on us before that happened.
So, Claire, where do upland producers go from here?
Well, fortunately, a lot of them will still be in schemes, but we need the reassurance that SFI is reopening. When is it going to reopen? Is there going to be anything suitable on offer for not just for the uplands in my part of the world, but for grazing, all grazing livestock systems, and then people can start planning ahead, because the last thing we want is anybody dropping off the edge of a scheme at the end of this year with nothing else to go into.
And Claire, you put out a message of support, if you like, on social media. And in that, you did admit to having had a cry in the corner of the lambing shed. Is that your coping mechanism? How are you going to keep your spirits up?
You've just got to keep going. I think my coping mechanism is not stopping, and I accept that's not healthy, but I reckon that's probably most farmers as well. That's probably the only advantage of our job, is that certainly working with livestock, they keep you distracted, because I do think if most of us sat down and really thought about things, we probably wouldn't get going again. So go and have a cry in the corner of the lambing shed, and then before you turn around, there'll be a set of triplets needs your help, and you just got to crack on.
Durham farmer Claire Wise, thank you very much. Hugh, not so many options open to upland livestock producers as there are to lowland arable producers, for example, certainly when it came to the SFI and perhaps going forward too.
No, there isn't. It's slightly easier, I think. Certainly, not if it's easy, but we talked obviously about industry schemes getting involved. There doesn't seem to be so much supply chain stuff happening in the livestock sector. And for the reasons you heard Claire describe, a lot of livestock producers, particularly upland producers, have ended up basically not getting involved with SFI because they thought the better offer was coming. And of course, it's just all disappeared. Now, some of the upland people will be thinking or are thinking, well, actually, this might end up being a good thing because they might divert more money from the lowlands to the uplands. But clearly, there is also a risk that it might go the other way as well, in whatever fathoms out at the end of this period of confusion and uncertainty. It's not easy. And it's also, we've mentioned it before, there was always that skewing more towards the arable and the grassland offer. It's pretty crucial money, and it's now missing, and it will be causing a lot of worry for a lot of people over the coming months.
And Louise, that worry very evident in the message of support that Claire put out on social media to fellow farmers from her lambing shed.
Yes, it was very evident, wasn't it? I mean, she used the term darkest days, which is almost like a bit of a war footing, isn't it? But of course, they're all very concerned. I mean, cash flows were tight enough as it is. So this is really very bad news for them. And I really, really hope that a solution is found, and it's found quickly, and it's one that works, because, the markets in the livestock sector are looking a bit better at the moment. So let's hope that they can get some comfort from that, and that things can move forwards.
Yeah, and we'll be looking at one way of potentially moving forward in just a moment. But first, a short break.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Fungicide programmes for winter wheat will be getting underway shortly, so it's important to have a robust disease control plan in place. Univoc can be applied at the T1 or T2 timing to target septoria and rusts. Univoc is a proven, reliable choice for growers who want to enhance their yield and optimise the return on their investment. Containing the unique Inatrec active molecule, the inclusion of Univoc in a programme will also boost the resistance management of other modes of action. Find out more about Univoc, which contains Corteva's unique Inatrec active molecule, at corteva.co.uk/Inatrec.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
We've heard from two farmers in the wake of the closure of the Sustainable Farming Incentive to new applications. One farmer ramping up production instead of undertaking environmental measures, and the other battening down the hatches. The government says the SFI had simply become unaffordable, and it'll announce a revised offer to farmers in the summer. But that new scheme, that revised offer, is unlikely to open to applications before 2026. So what should that revised offer look like? Well, joining us now is Geoff Sansome, former head of agriculture at Natural England, one of the government bodies overseeing the SFI. Geoff, the government says it had to close the scheme because it simply ran out of cash. It was a victim of its own success, and there wasn't enough money to go round. Part of your answer for this revised scheme, if and when it appears, is to limit the amount of funding per farm.
Yeah, I think the situation we're in at the moment just underpins the absolute need for some budget management of SFI, both at the national level, and because the scheme is uncompetitive, everybody has a right to apply, then you do need to have budget management both at the national level, and you need to have it at the farm level. Otherwise, we'll end up in the situation where we are now, where we have less than about a third of potential holdings who have applied, and the budget apparently is overutilised. And I think we can learn from the past in this situation. We had a very successful delivery model for entry-level stewardship, which had a very well-defined budget limit per farm based on a budget limit per hectare. And it was very well managed and very, very successful. And I think it's really quite incredible that this scheme was launched without any budget management around it.
Those of us looking at this from the outside, Geoff, see it as being absolutely incredible. You've been on the inside, I hasten to add, not when this decision to pull the SFI was made, but what's your take on it? What's the reason for it happening?
It's an interesting one. It was a fundamental mistake. It was pointed out. Lots of times, including by some of the external program reviews. There was a lot of political pressure to get the scheme up and running quickly. Clearly, there was a lot of industry kickback to the withdrawal of basic payment scheme. And I think that political pressure resulted in some possibly unwise decisions around things like the management fee, some of the payment rates, indeed some of the options, in a at times desperate need to show that there was progress and there would be farmer uptake. But this really should have been modelled through with a total transparency around the budget. Likewise, there was quite a bit of farming industry pressure around the original split across environmental land management. It was announced way back, I think, in 2019. The intention was that would be 30% for SFI, 30% for countryside stewardship, and 30% for landscape recovery. That was challenged, and DEFRA drew back from that. Now, it doesn't matter whether it was 30-30-30 or 40-30-20 or whatever, but you have to have something to move forward on, something to model on to avoid the consequences that we're facing now.
Yeah, and so can we still get that sort of 70% farmer uptake? That was their target, but with a more limited budget, do you think?
I think we can, but you have to start somewhere, so we need to agree what the budget is. So once we know the budget, it's simple maths. There's 9.2 million hectares of utilisable agricultural area in England, and if you're aiming for 70% and you divide that into the budget, you know what you can play with. My rough sums show that £100 a hectare average across all the land entered ought to be, very, very achievable, even with only 30% of the total farming budget, which was the original plan. And clearly for some people, probably only a few people, that would mean they would probably be receiving less than they are now in SFI. It's an interesting analysis and we want to do it first. But for many, many people who either haven't got an application in or indeed haven't had the options available to them, like many grassland farmers or upland farmers, it will be a very, very welcome option to change.
So that would mean, I think, amending some of the existing SFI agreements that are already out there, so that they come within these sort of new financial limits, if that's what they are. How do you think that would be received?
Well, it's a contentious proposal, and it's something I've floated. What I would want to do, Louise, is actually do the analysis first, and it's a pretty straightforward analysis RPA could do their data systems. So essentially look at those the SBIs, the farms which have SFI, what land they have registered, what they're receiving on SFI, and see how many of those come over whatever threshold you pick, the £100 a hectare threshold. I imagine it would not be even the majority of them. I imagine it's a few large farms who have taken us over this limit. Then if you decide that, okay, we do need to reduce those, then there's various ways of doing it. Some of them might actually be more suitable to go into countryside stewardship type options if they have chased some of those. Others, then you could, it would be, an interesting decision as to when you reduce their payments down to that level, or with a more multi-annual forward look on the budget, you could say, okay, well, we can live with that for 1 or 2 years, knowing that ultimately those will come within the level. So there are tunes that can be played. Clearly, some of those people would feel disadvantaged, but it's probably less people than who are currently feel disadvantaged, who haven't been able to get into the scheme, were just starting applications, or as I said earlier, haven't really had the options available to them previously.
Hi, Geoff. It's Hugh here. Just talking about SFI as an application process, I found, other than a couple of cock-ups with land designations, it was actually really easy. It was like click, click, bang, and there's 113 hectares in a scheme. I've got 2 more years left to run, so presumably on the scheme I've got now, presumably part of that analysis would be to look at, there's X left owing on that, and then going forward. But fundamental to this, Geoff, presumably, we actually need a plan that works and a plan that we stick to, because the goalposts have just been moving just ridiculously, haven't they, every 18 months since 2016, as I can see it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Hugh. And I go back to what I said earlier. When this was originally launched, there was a plan. We knew what the budget was going to be, let's say roughly 2.4 billion a year. And there was a plan that it would be split equally across the 3 ELM components. Once that disappeared, there hasn't been another plan. So it's pretty straightforward stuff. We can model through the BPS reductions, and we can model everything else. We ought to be able to model everything else through. I mean, I do feel very sorry for Minister Zeichner, I have to say. He's clearly getting it in the neck around this particular action. But everything which has led to this action happened before his government was on the scene. You can ask questions around when this problem was realised and why it wasn't acted on sooner, but this really is not a problem of this government's making.
And when you think about the succession and what might come, from your experience, trying to rearrange the deck chairs, set up the systems, rewrite the rule book, how quickly could you turn this round, do you think? If, let's say, you were hypothetically in charge, Geoff, and you had all the resources you needed, ha.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? I think it could be quickly turned around. I mean, probably within 2 or 3 months maximum. Basically, you need to agree what the budget is, how that's distributed, and that could be then applied to the existing IT as a kind of ceiling level. You need to take some decisions around what you do with those current agreement holders. And you would also probably take the opportunity to remove some of the existing options, whether if they're things like the management fee or maybe some of the simple plans. Again, we went through this with the LS where they put in initially and then taken out. And you would need a pretty rapid decision around whether some of the more complex countryside stewardship options should be removed. Those discussions have already been taking place over the last couple of years. There's been quite a lot of contention around some of those. So I think if the decision was taken, it purely then becomes a matter of putting in place the IT to make that happen. The real challenge is where we are now. Everybody will want to redesign SFI, and it's been 6 years more or less in the making. The last thing we want to do is redesign it. We want to refine it.
Geoff, thank you. Geoff Sansome there, former Head of Agriculture at Natural England. Thank you for talking to us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. Louise, some interesting ideas there from Geoff. We need to refine this sustainable farming incentive, not redesign it.
Yeah, good to see some ideas, isn't it? I think the rest of us have been rather stunned by last week's announcement and not quite sure which way to turn. So isn't it great that somebody's tackling this and somebody's coming up with what looks like a very workable solution? Of course, not everybody will welcome some of the things that Geoff is suggesting, but at least he's finding a way through this rather than just leaving everybody hanging.
And clear, Hugh, that, from his point of view at least, that we're not going to get more money as an industry for SFI. This is about how that money, how that budget, whatever that budget might be, how that budget is allocated to individual farms.
Yeah, it's how we get it out to farms. And that's the thing, isn't it? And this is the budget technically is still there. The budget is committed, supposedly, unless the Chancellor's next announcement changes that. But at the moment, the budget is committed till March 26. It's just a case of getting it out the door in an efficient and timely way, and in a way that's fair and spreads the love effectively as much as it can. Because obviously, without the caps and the limits not being on, whether it's wild bird or whatever, we've seen these horrendous overspends on, if you look at as he said, the take per hectare has gone crazy in some cases. And look, government was desperate to get money out the door and to say, we've got all these farmers signed up. And then they've sort of ended up where they are because they didn't really mind it. So it just needs a plan and some speed and get it out the door and it'll be running again. I know it's no comfort to people that were about to apply and haven't been able to, or those that are waiting for checks. There's also a bit of uncertainty and a bit of rumblings going on because I think many people are waiting for SFI checks for the last month or so. And they still haven't turned up those payments. So no one's really sure what's going on there, which clearly that doesn't fill people with confidence. But yeah, it's about just getting a plan and just getting it out the door, isn't it?
Louise, you raised an interesting point. I mean, people have been piling into the scheme or had been piling into the scheme in a big way. And that meant that the budget, I guess, was used up and other people couldn't get into the scheme because the government then closed it. Hugh's talked about it needing to be fair. This idea of putting a limit on farms and actually amending existing agreements, I mean, that is not going to go down well, no matter how well-intentioned, I guess, Geoff's been in making that suggestion.
Well, that won't go down well at all, I wouldn't imagine, because it would just be more pain on top of the pain that farmers have already had. But it is a way, I guess, of making the system, being able to get this wider uptake that they're so keen to get. It is a way of achieving that. But to tell somebody who has delivered a lot of actions across quite a big area of the farm that they're going to have to row back on all that when they thought they had a lasting agreement isn't going to be easy. So, that's something which we'll have to watch this space and see if that's a solution that they think is a good idea. I think Geoff came up with a figure of around £100 a hectare. That would be achievable if we want this 70% farmer uptake of the sustainable farming incentive. So with the budget that we've got, all the farms that wanted to go into it would be able to see back about £100 a hectare. Now, obviously, there are farms that are at that limit now. There are farms that are above that limit, and there are farms that are below that limit. So that would take quite a bit of rejigging, and I would imagine there'd be quite a bit of anger as well.
There would be anger, and I think actually, if you think about it, what's the worst? It's people like me that have a year in. I've got 2 years left on the current deal. Presumably, part of the analysis is to work out how much do they owe going forward, and therefore to work that into the factor. My deal, I'm doing £138.19p a hectare, so I'm going to get cut potentially by 38 quid. There you go.
That's about a third of what you're getting at the moment, Hugh, and that's a big hit.
Yeah, it would be. I think to go in and to adjust rates now, again, it's part of the analysis, isn't it? It's going to be looking at it because these SFI agreements are all only 3 years. So it's not like it's an old stewardship one where it goes on for 10 years or with a 5-year review point. So it's not too long a timeline, although there might not be any ag budget left by the time we get to the end of the 3-year terms because we pass March 26.
Clear also, Hugh, that what Geoff is saying is we need to be realistic. There needs to be a budget set. It's not that difficult to then work out how much per hectare that budget equates to, given that you want, for example, 70% of farmland to sign up to it. It's not a difficult thing.
No, it's not a difficult calculation. It's really a case of just, the area, the budget that's available. The worst case scenario is that every hectare is claimed for. The best case scenario is there's a bit of underspend, and therefore you roll it over into the next year or redistribute it through another scheme. But yeah, it can't be that hard, surely, to get right.
But one of the things that we do just need to recognise is that in all the talk about the sustainable farming incentive from the outset, there was this mention of farmers being able to increase their ambition. So you could start off quite simply, and then you could add actions in as and when it was right for your business, and then you could deliver more for the environment. So obviously putting some sort of financial limit on it at the individual farm level does take that away.
And the other thing that's clear is that although this could take sort of 2 or 3 months, we're not realistically going to see a revised scheme launched until 2026, Hugh.
No, it would be amazing. I'd be amazed. And look, fair play. If they could get something out the door for the autumn, that would be pretty commendable. But realistically speaking, yeah, you're probably right. It's probably going to be the early part of next year.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Discover Kubota's M7004 series, which celebrates a decade of exceptional innovation in Kubota's flagship tractor lineup. The new M7004 features a 6.1-litre, 4-cylinder Kubota engine with up to 175 horsepower and offers a choice of power shift or updated KVT transmission. It is equipped with advanced auto guidance, smart farming technologies and TIM, Kubota's tractor implement management for semi-autonomous operations. Key updates enhance operator convenience, including the ability to set cruise control speed without moving, an automatic assisted parking brake, and an improved K-monitor for expanded functionality. For more information about the new M7004 series, visit www.kubota.co.uk or contact your local Kubota dealer today.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us, as we say every week, podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm, followed by your message to 88440. All about the sustainable farming incentive and the way forward. This week, that announcement, that shock announcement, still rattling its way through the industry, still causing shockwaves. More government announcements on the way, including in the coming week, the government's spring statement, another statement from Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Will she target farming again? Some speculation that she might do, some speculation that no, the government's going to leave farming alone. Some rumours flying around and counter-rumours about the possibility or otherwise that red diesel could be in the firing line. Louise, what have you heard?
Well, all I've heard is speculation and rumour, which is not very helpful, really, is it? But there are obviously some concerns about what might happen to red diesel in the statement next week. We have to hope that that is just rumour and that the situation remains unchanged, because I'm not sure that the industry can take another blow. But there again, I'm sure we've said that before.
And any impact on farming, of course, would be another hammer blow on an industry which has already been hard hit by government measures.
Oh, well, it wouldn't have a positive impact at all, would it? You know, we're just getting into the season of field work and, all that involves. So obviously quite a bit of fuel use when you're going through the fields, treating the crops. So it wouldn't be good news for the arable sector at all. Of course, it is worth pointing out that an awful lot of people have really reduced their fuel use on farms. You know, that's been a real work in progress, and there's been some fantastic results achieved. So we have to hope that it remains unchanged, and we just have to believe that the government will recognise what a problem that this would create for the farming industry.
Should you put this in some kind of context for us? We have, to a certain extent, been here before, haven't we, in numerous occasions?
Yeah, we have. The red diesel duty was, when was it? It goes way back. The allowance, it was way back to the 1920s when government said heating oil shouldn't be taxed the same as motor fuel. And that's where it all started. And then it's rumbled on from there. Now, the most recent thing was when we had, I think it was 2022, when the building industry, they had to move over to using full duty or white diesel or DERV. And then certain sectors were still allowed to use red diesel, one of which is agriculture. The other one, interestingly, is the rail industry. Now, they use a fair old bit because they're pretty old, juicy things, rail locomotives and passenger trains. So they're still allowed to use it. And some allowances also for maritime use as well. And for charities, I think, can still use it to power generators and strange things like that. But taking the duty or adjusting the duty in any way would have had a huge impact on farms, as Louise has said.
Well, we'll give you the Farmers Weekly red diesel price in just a moment. But first, Hugh, the rest of the markets, how are we doing?
Finished deadweight this week, 665.2. That is up just over 10p on the week. A massive jump there. The live weight average for the UK is up 8p, 372 per kilo. To the lambs and sheep, SQQ, for the deadweight, 738.7. That is back 0.2 on the week, so not much movement there. On the live weight, 340.7. That is back 10p on the week. Pig prices very marginally up, 204.2, the SPP, up from 203.8 last week. To the arable market, on these figures, it's not much movement. £170 for a tonne of feed wheat, that is back 10p on the week. Milling wheat 191.1, that's up just over £1. Feed barley edges slightly up, £154.70. Oilseed rape 389.6, that's back just over 10 quid on the week. Feed beans 216.7, feed beans 217.1, and if you are buying diesel this week, the Wednesday morning ring round is 68.26 pence per litre of red tractor diesel.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, the phase out of the basic payment scheme and the closure of the Sustainable Farming Incentive to new applications means that public money for farming is extremely tight. So where can new revenue streams come from? Well, big corporations, big food companies are increasingly interested in investing in agriculture. And earlier I spoke to Duncan Rawson from English Food and Farming Partnerships, and I started by asking him how his organisation bridges the gap between farming and big business.
We build collaborative supply chains, and within that we build the relationships within it. So we tend to work for the larger branded organisations. In particular, we do work with others as well. So the likes of Nestle, for instance, the likes of Molson Coors, the likes of Kellanova, as it is now, helping them initially think about why it is they want to reconnect to the farming base. We then help them think about what supply chains they could potentially work through and start building those relationships down through the supply chain until eventually we start to identify farmers and then build programs, preferably working with the farmers, like I say, to deliver a value proposition for the farmers as well, and then support the implementation of that program. And what sits right at the heart of it, and it's something I never shy away from saying to any of our clients, is that if it doesn't add value to the farmer, forget it. You won't have a sustainability program if it's not adding value to the farmer. So we've got to get that financial piece right as well. My background is I'm a farmer. That's where I come from. That's what sits in my heart. And so it's all about saying, we've got to be building something and delivering something that the farmer actually values, and then it will work.
So Duncan, this is about food companies incentivising farmers, paying farmers for doing things more sustainably, be it producing milk, producing grain, producing meat, whatever it might be, whatever raw commodity it is that the farmer is producing for the food chain. It's about meeting those sustainability targets and reducing things like Scope 3 emissions. And that's becoming increasingly important.
Yes, I think absolutely. But I think we sort of have to take a step back. The farming industry, as be well understood amongst your audience, of course, is facing into huge challenges. But so are food businesses. They're also facing into huge challenges, which have really come to the forefront over the last few years. Just security of supply issues. Can they actually get the products that they want, particularly into the long term as well, with sort of climate shocks, geopolitical shocks, etc. So they themselves are having to change the way that they think about their supply chains and how they secure up their supply chains. And that's driving them to want to build those relationships with farms and of course through the other actors throughout the supply chains as well. At the same time, it's becoming challenging for farmers as well, and they need to look at other sources of income or other ways of sort of monetizing the produce that they're building. So I think the private money that can come out of food companies, and that can be utilized in different ways. It doesn't always have to be a premium paid for a product. It can actually be money that's paid to actually support farmers in different ways by helping them transition through some of the changes that they may need to make. Supporting sort of pilot programs, supporting research and development, supporting knowledge exchange, etc. Is going to be a key part of this.
And a good example of one of these initiatives, Duncan, is one by Nestle. Tell us what Nestle are doing.
Yeah, but Nestle is really interesting. Nestle have just, in the last couple of weeks, actually celebrated 21 years of their milk plan and their relationship with First Milk. And we supported them a number of years ago in developing that relationship further, I guess, is turning it from what you could potentially call a sort of more tactical relationship to one that became more strategic, and then working with the farmers to develop a pricing mechanism that supported the farmers and paid certainly above market price for the milk, but a price that was going to be long-term viable, and then developing a sustainability program around that with an incentive structure that worked. It did more than just cover the costs that the farmers would incur. It gave them a premium on top of that. Core to that work, though, was actually working with the farmers, setting up a working group, which would include Nestle, included First Milk, but also included a number of farmers to design that program from the bottom up. So it was really delivering. And one of my really interesting take-homes from that is that, I remember sitting in these meetings where we were sort of saying, well, this is the kind of thing we'd like to do. And this is, I think we need to sort of push the farmers along a little bit. And the farmers in the room were sort of saying, well, actually, I think we can push further than that. Their ambition was greater than our ambition. And within that, why? I guess it's because we got them engaged. They were truly helping create something, which comes back to that value thing I keep harping on about. They could see the value that it was going to deliver to them. They could see the value of the long-term nature of the contract. They could see the value of the pricing mechanism. They could understand, because they had that relationship with the end user, why they wanted to have an environmental program in place. And that trust was built.
And for farmers hearing this on the Farmers Weekly podcast, Duncan, and wanting a slice of the action, as it were, what would you say to them?
Get involved, essentially. So, there's quite a lot of food companies out there who are looking at how they engage with farmers. They're putting a lot of pilot programs together, and they're looking for farmers to join that. Now, of course, in quite a few cases, there'll be geographic issues there. They want to procure from a certain area, so it might not be available to all farmers, and of course farmers need to be supplying the right products. But if an opportunity comes along to sort of join a food company and become involved, then jump on it, get involved with it, because there's a real opportunity as well, particularly at the early stages of sort of food companies sort of leaning into this direction. There's a real opportunity to actually help influence and co-create the programs they put together to ensure that they really do meet and add value to the farmer, meet farmers' needs and add value to the farmer as well.
Duncan Rawson there from English Food and Farming Partnerships, EFFP. We'll put a link to English Food and Farming Partnerships on the show notes page of this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, EFFP.com. You'll be able to find out more information there. Louise, you're familiar with some of these schemes, private money for public goods, as it were, particularly in the arable world.
Yeah, I am familiar with them, and some of them are working very well. I think there's a real point, and I think Duncan made that if it doesn't add value to the farm, then forget it. Farmers just aren't going to sign up. You've got to build something that the farmer values. But, it was quite a few years ago now when I first came across some of the work that they were doing with Kellogg's. And Kellogg's had a group of arable farmers at the time that they were working with. And one of the farmers at the time said to me, this is like farming with someone holding your hand rather than having one arm tied behind your back. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it, because, of course, they weren't paying them a premium as such, a load of extra money for their grain, but they were helping them with some really good technical support and advice to produce the grain in a way that was, of value to both parties. So it was interesting. And I know they moved on and done a lot more work, and other companies are very much doing the same sort of thing now. So, it's bringing in more resilience, and, there's a much more interest in forming these farmer supply chain groups now and working together. And that's been a real sea change for me.
It's basically it's optimizing the value of what you can do. It's thinking about it not as a commodity, but how can I add value to it? that benefits everyone, myself, there's the producer, people that are processing it, and then the people that are consuming it ultimately. I think the one thing, though, that we do need to be mindful of is that everything is really transparent. And where these schemes work really well, as Louise said, and as you heard in the audio, the absolute key to this is that the farmer, the producer, has got to feel like there's a premium there, there is an incentive there. But equally, whatever or however this is structured, whatever the long term or the short term or the medium term plan is, the whole thing has got to be very transparent. So everyone knows who's doing what. There's no funny bits, there's no dark bits. It's all totally open. Then it will work. And where you act like that with these schemes, where they are similar-ish schemes are in operation, it works really well. And actually, as you heard in the audio, when they were talking to these farmers about starting a scheme, the farmers involved wanted to do more than the processor had thought about. And that's great because they can identify instantly the benefits and ultimately increase the return to their business. So it's all to be encouraged, and be really interesting to see how it now develops.
It will indeed, and I think we're going to see more and more of these initiatives going into the future. Not just all about the money, of course, about doing the right thing too, but that much needed revenue, very, very welcome, particularly at the moment coming into UK agriculture. That's it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, and if you really like what you hear, please do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next Friday for some more news, views and analysis of everything going on in UK agriculture, including any fallout from Chancellor Rachel Reeves' spring statement. Let's hope it's not too tricky to navigate for UK farmers, growers and livestock producers. For now though, until next week, I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening.